Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Ajinulambita Bhujo Kanakabharato Sankirtanai Kapitaro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijavaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudai Pushpavanto Chitra Sando Tamono Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charano Sago Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subala Priyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchan Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. We learn a new one. Namaste Girirajaya Shri Govardhana Namane Asesha Klesha Nashaya Paramananda Daine Shri Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai Ode Premanande. Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita Ki Jai Shri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Mahashaya Ki Jai. So we're continuing our reading of the Madhya Lila, 7th chapter, Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita. We heard the introductory verse, Sanskrit composition of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami that highlights a section of the chapter that he found significant, and comes towards the end of the chapter, and as you may recall, we skipped ahead and explored the deliverance of the Brahmin Vasudeva, delivered from his leprosy, and how he himself, upon having, was it Nashtakushtam Rupapushtam Bhakti Tushtam, with Bhakti Tushtam became full, satisfied. Bhakti Pushtam, Rupa Pushtam, his form, which was not beautiful, being affected by open sores of leprosy, previously became beautiful, Nashtakushtam. So his leprosy was removed, a miracle. And Krishnadas has chosen to highlight this particular pastime within the chapter with his own Sanskrit verse that introduces the chapter. We discussed it at some length, and how Vasudeva, the leper, cited a verse from Bhagavatam upon being delivered, which we then were transported through that into Krishna Lila and the Dwarka Lila, where Sridham Brahman, Sudam Brahman, one of the Sudamas, we described 3 different Sudamas. Classmate of Krishna was blessed and benedicted by Krishna in his palace in Dwarka. Sudama Brahmana Ki Jai. And now then the second verse, Joy Joy Sri Chaitanya Joy Nitananda Joy Dvaita Chandra Jai Go Bhakta Vrinda. An emphasis on the Panchatattva we find at the very onset of the text. What does he say there? He says, Vande Gurun Isha Bhaktan Isha Nisha Avatarakam Tat Prakasham Satat Chakti Krishna Chaitanya Sangnakam. You may be familiar with this verse, and it's the first verse of Chaitanya Charitamrita, the beginning of Kaviraj Goswami's auspicious invocation, the Mangalacharana. And we wrote a book about it, in case you weren't aware. It has not been, let me say that I'm well ahead of the translating and publishing team here in Poland. I'm not as demanding as Prabhupada, though. When Prabhupada was writing the Chaitanya Charitamrita, his Chaitanya Charitamrita commentary, at that time the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, his publishing wing, there were two wings or two arms, two wings, let's say, for flying, to Prabhupada's mission. They were corporately independent, but they worked as a whole to deliver the body of devotees that were made up, that the Sangha was made up of. Those two wings were the corporate structure of ISKCON, and within that corporate structure, there were many divisions. So there was ISKCON of New York, ISKCON of Warsaw, ISKCON of Brighton, ISKCON of Sophie, and so on, right? And but that was all one wing, and the other wing was the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. He separated the two. This is very insightful on his part, and it follows, or it arises really out of the metaphysic that metaphysical doctrine of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's school that is called Achintya Beda Beda. So we'll take the Beda Beda part. The whole thing was inconceivable what he did. We'll say that. Right? It was Achintya, what Prabhupada did. But the two wings then, the Bed and Abed. So the Bed side was the publishing. Bed means, the Bed's the Abed side, non-different. And the Bed side, different. That was the ISKCON corporation. And as I've already described, that one wing was variegated. It had ISKCON of this place, ISKCON of that place, and each had its own imprint, its own sensibilities, cultural sensibilities, and so on and so forth. And Prabhupada sought to encourage that, the individuality of the centers, which would encourage the individuality of each devotee as well. He was very concerned about that. One time I was sitting with Prabhupada in Vrindavan. I was young and had taken sannyas shortly before that, and I heard that Prabhupada was going to cook that day, so I went down and I thought I'd help him cook. So I came down and Prabhupada was sitting and he wasn't cooking. And I said, Prabhupada, heard you were going to cook today, so I came down to help, to watch, to take part. And Prabhupada said, no, they are cooking very nicely. And he sat me down and then he began to speak about his independence and the independence of a sannyasi. It comes up here in this chapter, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's independence of the group. We'll come to that, but long and short, he said, I can cook with wood. He began like that, I can cook with wood. What he was saying was that I'm independent, right? And I'm a sannyasi. He's talking to me, I'm a young sannyasi, so I was appreciating the sannyasis at large should be independent, right? Not dependent on others and thereby compromised. They have to be independent, that they can be unbiased, impartial, and a friend who is brutally honest. That is something about the nature of friendship. Brutally honest. That comes up here too as we go forward, I believe. But just to continue for the moment, at that time, another godbrother of mine came in, and he has a very beautiful name. His name is Gopa Vrindapal. Gopa Vrindapal Ki Jai. Gopa Vrindapal. The Pal, the protector of the group of Gopas, of cowherds. It's the name for Krishna. Krishna and Balaram. Gopa Vrindapal. And he was a book distributor. So he came in and he wanted to present to Prabhupada an idea. And his idea was that we should develop a scheme or a system or some script that we give to the devotees who are preaching and selling books in particular, so that they will know what to say, and they will accurately represent, because who knows what they're saying out there. So he wanted to harness that, control that, to give a script, right? But Prabhupada didn't like the idea. He said, no, that is artificial. Again, he was stressing the independence of every devotee, the individuality of every devotee. And then he said, he's very gracious, he's very generous, just like our Tripurari Maharaj. Tesham satata yuktanam, bhajatam pritipubakam, dadami buddhiyogam tam, yena mam upayanti te. This happened to be the first verse I ever learned from Bhagavad Gita. I learned it at the San Francisco Ratha Yatra, first Ratha Yatra that I went to. The Ratha Yatra consisted of the procession with kirtan, distribution of prasadam, and kirtan all day long. 8-hour kirtan. And we weren't concerned what the public would think. We were in our own world. We weren't strategizing. We'll do it like this so that they become more attracted. We'll have a band come, or whatever. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, but we weren't thinking like that. We were just showing our love for Jagannath Swami as much as we understood who Jagannath Swami was. And the way we learned, of course, basically how to do that was to chant the holy name of Krishna. So 8-hour kirtan it was. And some people, some devotees, they served prasadam until it was gone, and they joined the kirtan. And it was very popular. It was very attractive to see persons so culturally, different and how would you say, colorful, exotic, right? And that they were from the West, largely at the same time, centered around the Indian sadhu, and they were completely absorbed in this, oblivious to whatever else was going on around them. And this was very attractive to them. So this is if you want to spread Krishna consciousness, this is the idea. You have to be Krishna conscious, right? If you want to meditate on Krishna and enter into the Leela in a meditative swarup, Kirtana Prabhave Smarana Swabhave. There's a statement of Bhaktisiddhanta is very appropriate. He says, by the power of Prabhav of Kirtan, the Smarana will come naturally. Smarana Swabhave. There's no better way to control the mind, to capture the mind. So I had my experience of that. And after the 8-hour kirtan, I learned my first verse from the Bhagavad Gita as we took a bus back down to Los Angeles, New Dwarka, Prabhupada's New Dwarka, where I was staying at the time. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipuvakam. Dami buddhiyogam tam yenamam upayantite. This happens to be, I believe, the second of the four uh, verses of the Gita that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who is the seminal Gaudiya commentator on Bhagavad Gita, the earliest commentary we have on Bhagavad Gita, comes from arguably the most rasic of our commentators. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur he doesn't hold back with his rasic explanations in the Bhagavatam. You'd think he's drifted way beyond the Bhagavad Gita, left that. No, Bhagavad Gita is a very important book. I've written a commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and I've thought for some time I have to write another commentary on Bhagavad Gita, so I think I'll do that next. But I'm going to write it in essay form, an essay on each chapter, take you through the chapter. What is it? Essentially, each chapter is saying. So don't neglect Bhagavad Gita. Everything can be learned from there. We'll have to show that, right, in the next edition. So in his commentary, he singles out four verses. As four verses of the Bhagavatam have been singled out as the four essential verses of the Bhagavatam, he singled out four essential verses of the Gita. They come in the 10th chapter. This is the second of them. Before I was initiated, I'm reminded at the moment, and I was living with some traveling Sankirtan party, was opening a preaching center in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California, where I was living. I was living there, and I was reading from the Krishna book and teaching it. I didn't know how to join, but I had figured that I wanted to. I had a shaved head, and my roommate, I was married at the time, my wife was pregnant, and my roommate was a very tall fellow with long black hair. He was a gay man, and he was living with us. And whenever the devotees would come to town or wherever he was traveling, and he'd see them on Sankirtan, which was fairly common occurrence, then he'd put on this orange cloth sheet and go out and dance with them. I mean, he looked like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. Long hair, big arms. So when he moved in with us, and then I was reading from the Krishna book and giving class and trying to explain it to others as I understood it. And so I think it was my wife said, well, you should shave your head. So I shaved my head. So when he saw I said I had a shaved head, he said, well, I got something, you need it more than me. So he brought out this orange sheet and gave it to me. So there I was wearing an orange sheet, a shaved head. And so this group of devotees from Los Angeles that were traveling on Sankirtan, they were opening a center in Santa Cruz. They heard about me. So I was like, word got out in those days. In those days, young people all pretty much knew what was on everybody else's mind. You could see a person across the street and they looked like you and you knew what they were thinking, and hey, brother, sister, and you could stick out your thumb and go anywhere. Come on in here, have one of these and let's talk about it, right? I was living on Highway 9, eating cactus, asking why. That was what I was doing. But I changed because I got hold of the Krishna book and so forth. So then I wasn't eating the cactus anymore. So they heard about me. There's this guy up there. So they came to preach to me, and they said, you can't wear that. You're married. You can't wear a yellow saffron. And they were telling me I was doing it all wrong. I wasn't following the rules. I didn't know the rules, but so they said, and you should come and join us. So I said, okay. So we went from the mountains down into the town of Santa Cruz, and they had a rented place, and I was there with the god sister. Her name is Baba Tarini. She was already initiated. Of course, I wasn't initiated yet. We were hitchhiking. She taught me the song Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopal Jaya Jaya. Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopal Jaya Jaya. Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya. Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya Radharamana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya. There's a nice story how Prabhupada introduced that one day spontaneously in San Francisco on the coast, on the beach. He just began to sing it and it became a part of ISKCON. It's a very nice, nice song. So one of my favorites. I wrote to her recently, Baba Tarini. I hadn't talked to her for decades. And I found her on Facebook and I wrote her and I thanked her for teaching me that song. She wrote back and said, I thought you would never even remember me. I said, I could never forget you. She's now moved with her husband to Vrindavan to retire there in Vrindavan. Vrindavan Dham Vijay. So we were left in the house in the preaching center, and the brahmacharis had gone out. And they suggested to us, they wanted to keep us busy and engaged, to write verses of the Bhagavad Gita on the wall. Now, it's not typically something you would do these days if you rented a house, to write things all over the wall, but it was fairly common in those days to write things on the wall. So as it turned out, I picked out the 4 verses from essential verses from the Bhagavad Gita, and those are the ones I wrote on the wall. And Baba Charini told me, those are the most important verses. I don't know how she knew that, but so then these verses resonate with me apparently, and one of them was the first one I learned. The verse says that those who worship Krishna with love continually, then tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam, then dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupayantite. I give the buddhi, the understanding by which they can come to me. I've learned so many verses since then, and I forgot a lot of them too by this time. So many verses, and I've read so many books. I try to fit Krishna consciousness between my ears and not let it go out, and try to gradually push it down into my heart, right? But and with regard to the path, how to attain the goal, the fact is, the first verse I read and learned says no one could say it better than Krishna himself. Worship me with love, and I will show you the way from within the heart. I will guide you. I will show you the way. And of course, if we add to that, if you show the way and you have some question, Devapati, who is it? Atul. If you think this is the way, then you can ask your guru and find out if you know it's the way. Yes, I think this is the way. Is this what he's telling me? Then we can ask. There's a difference between thinking and knowing. We were having this conversation earlier. He said, yes, I was thinking like that. Now I know, because Gurudev has confirmed. We had the Guru Puja, so a moment about that in this regard. Pujapad Sridhar said, to underscore the point, that if during your bhajan, Krishna appears to you and asks you to do some service, then you should say, give me a minute, let me ask my guru if you're the one that he's been talking about. You look like him, but I want to be sure, something like that. So Prabhupada quoted this verse to me in Govindapal. Second time, it really became important to me. And he said, just like our Tripurari march, Tesham Satatayutanam, Vajitam Pritipuvakam, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, Yenamam Upayantite. Krishna is in his heart and giving him so many things to say, to sell the books. Prabhupada used to hear, sometimes in his morning walk, he would hear things that other devotees would say, and Tripurari Maharaj is saying this, he's saying that, in order to sell the books. The beginning of the environmental crisis, came the attention to that, making headlines was in early part of the 1970s in the United States. And so when that became headlines, one of my lines was, "Have you heard about the energy crisis?" And they'd say, "Yes or no," and then I would say, here's the solution, the source of all energies, Krishna. And there was this little book. It was called, what's that little book called? Krishna. I can't remember. Maybe that was it. Reservoir of Pleasure, the source of everything. Anyway, so he would hear things like that. Yes, and he is saying like this, and he is saying, he liked those like lines that I would come up with, and sometimes when I was able to go on a walk with him, he would stop and ask, "And so Tripurari Marsh, what are they saying?" He wanted to know what the people were saying and how, and he wanted to give me something from his own spiritual genius, how to reply, right? So sometimes I would offer up some argument. Prabhupada, that once in Vrindavan, said, they are saying that we are parasites. Then he said, then stop taking. But you can't. Because, and he went on to explain, Krishna is making them take, and making them, we're simply glorifying Krishna. We're not parasites, we're not living off you. We're simply glorifying Krishna, and you're taking, and you're giving. If you think we're parasites, then don't give. Stop giving. But you can't, because this is beyond your control. This is Krishna Sankirtan. So Prabhupada's point to Gopavrinda was that Krishna is in his heart and he's giving him so many things to say, speaking to him, telling him. So every devotee will sincerely apply themselves to and if they are, then Krishna will give inspiration within. And he wanted to foster that kind of individuality. Now, the individuality that he sought to foster and the variety of expression, be it Sakyaras, be it Vatsalyaras, be it attraction to Kirtan or to Archan. Look at the beauty of Gaudiya Vedanta. All these ways to be engaged, all these ways to love, right? And he wanted to encourage that. Therefore, one wing, which was the corporation of ISKCON, each of the centers within that, he wanted them to have autonomy. And the leader of the temple to foster the autonomy of the individuals. Prabhupada once said that the way he spread his movement in the beginning was to experiment with the holy name by giving it to people, just giving it to devotees, and then seeing what came back. When they came back and said, in New York, they said, Prabhupada, we should have a temple in San Francisco, he would say. He would think Krishna's telling we should have a temple in San Francisco. One godbrother of mine was riding on a train with Prabhupada, in India. And from one destination to the next, they stopped along the way. Train stopped, at a stop. And they're there for a little time, and the devotee said, Prabhupada, this is a very nice town here. We should have a preaching center. Prabhupada said, get off the train, start a preaching center here. That's a true story. One of my godbrothers, one chapter in ISKCON, there are many controversial chapters in ISKCON. Do you think our Sangha has some controversial chapters? Get used to that. That's part of the territory. People are complex. Sanghas are made up of people. They're more complex, right? Give it time. Give it time. Everything will be understood. Hold on tight. It can be a bumpy ride, but it's going in the right direction. Okay. That you should be sure of. So one chapter, a famous godbrother of mine was actually the GBC in India, of all India, where Prabhupada was actually the GBC. So, because Prabhupada knew how the Indians, his countrymen thought, and it was difficult to penetrate that mind entirely and their way of doing things, and could easily get cheated or and so forth. So This God with him was really really a manager, and so when Prabhupada saw someone was a manager disposition, well, he made him a manager. You may think, why did Prabhupada make him the manager? Because he's a manager. That's what he does. That's what she does. That's what they're like. Doesn't mean they won't make mistakes. Doesn't mean they won't bloop, as we used to say. They won't leave. They might even turn against Prabhupada. And then they might even come back and become a hero. All things possible, right? But what do you do with someone like that? Well, let him manage. It needs so they would put certain people in charge in a managerial sense. In a managerial sense. One time, one of my godbrothers asked Prabhupada, why so many big devotees are falling? And Prabhupada said, big devotees don't fall. So the chapter, anyway, was that he had asked Prabhupada permission to leave his post as a GBC in India and go to the United States and serve. So Prabhupada gave him permission. He came to the United States, but he didn't have his own. So then he went and tried to collect a zone. And it was fairly political and some struggle and whatnot. And anyway, gradually he got some support and some. He stole devotees from the temples. He would come to the temple with a bus, and then for the Sunday feast, and then the temple president would say, "Oh, the sannyasi is here." So after the feast, after he gave the lecture, then the sannyasi would say, "Is there any persons in the crowd that are like on the cusp of joining? Bring them, and I'll answer their questions and talk to them." So the temple president would go and bring the devotees who were maybe just on the verge of joining and introduce them, close the door and have a chat. And in the room, he'd say, "I've got a bus outside." And he would paint this romantic picture. You could be traveling across the countryside, singing and dancing, instead of being stuck in this city like this, in one little temple. And he said, and right after Mangal Artik at 5 o'clock, it's going to be parked right here, and we'll be taking off. So I'm inviting you to come. So then these men would go, and in the temple, what happened to our, like this. So he collected a big party like this, but the temple presidents, they revolted, understandably. So when we came to Mayapur that year for the festival, they pressed their case to Prabhupada. So and so was like stealing all these men, and he was doing a good service. They were selling books and so forth, but there was a price from the temple president's point of view, and the temple presidents were all householders, and he was a sannyasi. So they made their case to Prabhupada, who was a sannyasi, but he sided with all the householders. The reverse of that, one time, I was with Prabhupada, and I had recently taken sannyas, and there was a godbrother of mine in Los Angeles that I knew who was interested in taking sannyas, so I encouraged him to take sannyas. He was married, but he had no children, and he was good at making devotees and doing kirtan. That was his thing. So I invited him to join me, and we had a relationship. And I wasn't there in Los Angeles, but we had communicated. And so the temple president was why this man needs to take sannyas. Actually, I didn't encourage him to join me, but I encouraged him to take sannyas. I thought he was a good candidate. And I don't remember all that was part of the conversation, but anyway, he was, telling this to the temple president. I'm in the next room, and the temple president, very nice man, I loved him very much. He's passed away. He was talking with Prabhupada, and I could overhear what was going on, and he was saying, Tripurari Maharaj is a new sannyas. He's encouraging this man to take sannyas. He's our bhakta leader, and if he leaves, then well, why does he need to take sannyas? And Prabhupada went back and forth with him. Prabhupada wouldn't agree with him. And finally he said, but Prabhupada, Bhakti Vinod was a householder. There was no need for him to take sannyas. It's true. And Prabhupada said, yes. But my Guru Maharaj was a sannyasi. Real loud I could hear. I think Prabhupada knew I was in the next room. He was just encouraging me at the cost of this devotee who's so Prabhupada was very, very kind in that way. Anyway, when the sannyasis, when the householders, temple presidents complained, he took the side in this case with all the householders. And so he called that sannyasi in to chastise him. And Prabhupada started telling him that these men, they should be joining the temple, something like this. And he's hearing this from Prabhupada, and Prabhupada, he said to Prabhupada, I might as well go to China, the way you're like narrowing down my program, like you were doing in India when I was the GBC, cramping my style. I mean, he's a very nice devotee. He passed away also, but he said, I might as well go to China. Then Prabhupada lit up and said, yes, Krishna wants you to go to China. We don't have a temple in China. And he just could not believe what Prabhupada was saying. He just could not believe it. But, and he stuttered, and then he tried to push back, and then another godbrother of mine said, so-and-so, Prabhupada the spiritual master wants you to go to China. So finally the light went on, right? The light, oh yeah, what am I doing here? What's this all about, right? And so then it began, the Chinese yatra. And recently I heard from Agni Dev, Shriman Agni Dev, that in Mayapur, there's a Chinese embassy of devotees there now, after all these years, right? Where's Agni? Oh, he's on. He didn't know that. And one Chinese lady came to him and said, Agni, we need you in China. And then after he was there on the lockdown during the COVID, right? And so after the COVID, that young lady from China came to him and gave him a gift, and it was very culturally very, very beautiful. And so we got to get him over to China. Maybe I'll go with him. I have a godbrother in China that writes me sometimes, and he seems to be doing good service there. So many stories. So Prabhupada, this is how, to a large extent, he ran his movement. He felt, I gave them Harinam, I gave them Diksha Mantra, they're serving, they're sincere, Krishna must be giving them some inspiration. If something comes out of their mouth, I should pay attention to that. Now, that doesn't mean he listened to everything. He listened, doesn't mean he agreed with everything, right? That's another thing. One time, one of my godbrothers, big fellow, very big fellow, he was a sannyasi also. We were after the class, every morning, the Prabhupada gave class, there would be a short kirtan. So during the kirtan, this devotee was swaying to and fro like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like this, and dancing like 1, 2, 3. And he was a big guy, and he was like right next to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada looked up, and then afterwards he said, I saw Brahmananda dancing, and I thought he has got bhav. And then I knew it was just in his head. And then I came to my senses. No, not the bhav. So Prabhupada was looking to learn from us about how America works and whether Krishna is speaking through us and so forth. He was but he wouldn't. If we presented some idea that was contrary to Scripture or some idea that wasn't accurate. I can think of many examples of that. I won't go into them. Then he would of course, he wouldn't accept that. So, point is that that in this one wing of his movement, the way he arranged it, it was meant to foster the individual development of each devotee. You know, each devotee is an independent unit of Krishna consciousness, meant to please Krishna in a particular way. Even if you were all gopas or all gopis, you'll all be different, right? Right. So this was a very strong point of his. And this is one of the ways in which he organized. So I refer to this as the Bade side of the Bade Abed. Bade means difference. Abed means non-difference. So the other wing was the book trust, the books, the philosophy, and that was one. He wanted that edited. He didn't want any one word changed. He was a little afraid of us. We would be changing it, and as we thought it might be better, and he didn't allow that. So he wanted a singular philosophy, which Gaudiya Vaishnavism is, a singular philosophy that is beautified by the variety of expression that it gives rise to. We attach ourselves to the philosophy, then we can have some unity. We can have some unity within that. This is the bottom line. We'll go with the Shastra Chakshu, the eyes guided by scripture. And out of that, if we're doing that, out of that, some real and beautiful variety will come. Right? So somehow we began talking about this. It's interesting. Somehow from the text, I can't recall exactly how. We heard that, yes, Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya, Jai Nityananda, Jai Dvaita Chandra, Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. He begins every chapter like this, as he begins the book with Vande Guru Nisha Bhakta Nishan Ishavatarakam Tat Prakasham Satat Shakti Krishna Chaitanya Samnakam. This is the first verse of Chaitanya Charitamrita, glorifying the Panchatattva Ki Jai. You could say Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta-rupa Swarupa Avataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam. Right? Another verse, also there in the sacred preface, I wrote about the Mangalacharan, the auspicious invocation, Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's important to read that, study the philosophy, out of which this kind of beautiful variety that is harmonious. Even we say, for example, that some rasas are not compatible with others. But Vatsalya rasa is the enemy of Madhurya rasa, is the enemy of Sakya rasa. Now, does that mean we don't like Yashoda? No, she's our mother. Yashoda Mayi ki jai. Kirtida Devi ki jai. Oh, we Sachimata ki jai. Rohini Devi ki jai. No, it means that that's required, right? This is required. Vatsalya is required. If there isn't the concern of Vatsalya that gets in the way and becomes inimical to the Madhurya of the Parkriya variety, there will be no Parakiya. Right? See how Vatsalya is helping in an indirect way. So these statements of incompatibility, friendly and enemy rasas, and so forth, they're all has to be understood properly. So this is all variety of expression, right? That we like. Take me. Okay, so I am a disciple of Prabhupada, right? I have many god brothers and god sisters, but also after the disappearance of Prabhupada, Pujapad Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj very kindly came into my life. I mean, I was pretty well read in Prabhupada's books. I was, I was famous for distributing Prabhupada's books, and my godbrother Ramaswar was always writing to Prabhupada, Tripurari Maharaj is selling this many books, Tripurari Maharaj is doing this, Tripurari Maharaj is doing that. He was very kind in that way, and Prabhupada would write back. Well, the first letter that he wrote to Prabhupada about Tripurari Maharaj has sold this many books and so on, Prabhupada wrote back, it's very nice that Tripurari Das is selling so many books. It's just amazing. And then he put a asterisk there, and he signed his name, and at the bottom he put the asterisk like a footnote. He said, in his own handwriting, he wrote, but please make sure that he's reading the books too. Which I was. Going to the class, that I lived for that. I lived for the next class. We had little chapters of the Bhagavatam because none of the books were published, the Bhagavatam books, but we had a couple of chapters. They were to give a class from that. And what was going to happen next? Today a four-headed person appeared. Tomorrow what? A six-armed person, and then what? It was just very fascinating to me to attend the class and to read whatever books were available. I was always caught up on all the books and all the tapes. When I would go when I was living in Los Angeles, and I would began to distribute books at the airport, which was illegal. We would do it illegally in secular dress. Then I would help to arrange other devotees to go out on Sankirtan, and then I would go, and I drove in Prabhupada's car. It was a Toyota. It wasn't a Rolls Royce, right? It was because all the other cars had gone out for Sankirtan, that was left. So I would drive it to the airport, and myself and one god sister of mine, sometimes also, we would go together. And in the airport, it was, a lot of different places, and we were the only devotees there. And sometimes I can remember at a distance, I would see her, Leela Shakti, and I would think, we just had such a bond because we were experiencing the same thing. What sacrifice we were making to do that, and dealing with just trying to sell the book to a person, but dealing with the authorities at the same time, so we didn't get arrested and so forth. And I would see her at a distance, and it was just that she'd see me at a distance. We would just telepathically communicate, right? It was so beautiful. She passed away recently too. Leela Shakti, Devi, Vijay. So anyway, on the way to the airport, then the most recent class that Prabhupada had given, which was available on a tape, then I would listen to the class and memorize it. Then I would say it back to myself on the return trip. So I had some ability for that. It's nothing special, but we all have our own special abilities. But I used my ability, as all of us should, whatever it is, your speciality, your ability. The ability in man and woman is Krishna, he says. That is the vibhuti of Krishna. We use that in a service, right? So I use that little cleverness of mine, good memory for some things. For the things that are important, I have a good memory. So I was well read in the books, and had great respect for them. When the Bhagavatam was published for the first time, there were 6 volumes that came out. The first canto in 3 volumes, the second canto in 2 volumes, and then we had the first volume of the third canto. 7 books came out at the same time, and they arrived on a Friday night, late. I wasn't there, but my godbrother Ramaswar organized them and put them in the warehouse, and then he had some of them in what we call the book room. But then he closed the boxes. He said, no, now we, after Artik, and we do japa and class, and then it was a Saturday, so he and I would arrange for not only the Sankirtan devotees to go out, but for all the householders to go out. And I would go door to door to the apartment, knock on the door and say, you're in the car this, and your lunch is over there, and your books are there, and so forth. So we would send them all out, right? So we sent them all out, and he said, Ramaswar said, we're not going to give them these books because if we give them the books, they'll never go out. They'll just have these books and they'll just all be like, they'll never get out there. Right? So, okay, so when they come back, we'll give them the books. But when they were all gone, because I was selling, hardback books at the airport, he said, well, you can take them for selling them. So I was the first person to sell the Prabhupada's hardback Bhagavatams in the world. What a blessing that was, huh? I went to the airport, and there I would sit down with somebody and say, where are you from, and so forth. And here, let me show you something. And I would give them the book. And at that time, I said, this is a very special book. I would say it's very spiritual. And I was nervous because I had heard all these things about the Bhagavatam. To keep the Bhagavatam in your house, all the devas, all the gods and goddesses will come there, and so forth. So I would say to them, you got to keep it in a sacred place. That's why I talked to them. I was like, it was like crazy in a way. You got to keep it in a sacred place. You got to be, and I didn't even really say what it was about, but and they just looked at me like, I think I'll get it. I go, wow, what's this guy about? What's this book about? And so I was so excited and so absorbed and in a trance. I was in samadhi. And I came back from the airport on the 405. From people from Los Angeles will know, especially in those days. Run on the 405, take the Venice Boulevard exit, and from the Venice Boulevard exit into Culver City to where the temple is, it's just a long straight line, so many red lights, and all the lights were green, one after another. Green light, green light, green light, green light. And I'm going back to the temple where I am going to get the opportunity to get my own, set of the books, right? And start to look at them and read them, So I got back to the temple, and at the book room, there were so many devotees, and they were looking at the books. They had come back earlier. I was out later. I was back later. When I came in to the room, Ramaswar took one look at me and saw he could understand my condition. So he just grabbed the 6, 7 books, and gave them to me and sent me home. I lived across the street with my wife. I went home. I made an altar for the books for Arti to the Bhagavatam. Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam, Jai. So Prabhupada wanted me to make sure that, he's always reading the books also. Right? So I emphasize that to you too. It comes to mind here when I speak of the Panchatattva, who chapter after chapter after chapter, appropriately so, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is giving his respects. As he begins the book, each chapter, Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Dvaita Chanda, Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. And we've written a whole book about that, Mangalacharan, right? And about that Panchatattva. And that's what the book's about. It's called Sacred Preface. You may have read it. Right? So it's a book that can be read and read again. And as I say, comparatively, the Polish publishing division is much far behind me than ISKCON's BBT, the other wing, right? The book publishing was behind Prabhupada. Prabhupada was in Los Angeles, and he was walking on the beach, in Venice Beach, and I was there, and Prabhupada, Ramaswar, who was in charge of book publishing, told Prabhupada, at that time the BBT, Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, was publishing two volumes of Prabhupada's Bhagwan commentary a month, 2 volumes a month. It was an ambitious publishing effort. And so he said, Prabhupada, now we're publishing 2 volumes of your Bhagavatam a month. He thought Prabhupada would be pleased with the report. He was always giving me reports to Prabhupada about book distribution, how many books. So this was like, he had the pulse of the book distribution and the book publishing. That was his thing. Very dear friend of mine. He's living in Mayapur now, 6 months of the year. But instead of saying, very nice, Prabhupada said, but you are behind. I have published Chaitanya Charitamrita. I've written my whole commentary of Chaitanya Charitamrita. And he said, yes, we think that will be 17 volumes, Prabhupada. 17 volumes. So Prabhupada said, so you are 17, you're telling me you're publishing 2 a month, but what you're really saying is you're 17 volumes behind me. Hmm. Prabhupada was quite a general, huh? 17 volumes behind me. So Ramaswar went back and then he made up that night he made a plan with the BBT. They stayed up all night to come up with a plan, and they figured out how they could publish um, what was it? Um, I think 2 volumes of Bhagavatam and 2 volumes of Chaitanya Charitamrita every month. So they were going to double the work output, right? So that would mean that in 8, 9 months, the Chaitanya Charitamrita would be out, right? 2 volumes a month. So he told Prabhupada, we just figured out how we can publish, 2 volumes a month. And Prabhupada said, 2 volumes a month? I want all volumes in 2 months. That's how Prabhupada was driving the engine of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And Ramaswar fainted. I'm thinking he went pralay, he just completely passed out on the beach. And he said, Prabhupada, that is impossible. And Prabhupada quoted who? Napoleon. Impossible as a word in the Fool's Dictionary. So he gave us a Napoleon task, if you will. And to their credit, the BBT did it. They published all volumes in 2 months. They didn't stay up one night to make a plan. They stayed up every night for 2 months, all night long. And blessed as I was in Chicago at the time, distributing books at the airport with other devotees, and Ramaswar sent me off the press first volumes. First one would be given to Prabhupada, and then they would have copies for the GBC. They were gold embossed. So Ramaswar FedExed me every volume every time it came out. So I was reading, maybe the first person in the Western world to read the Chaitanya Charitamrita. I would read it with the devotees at night. Then he started sending us, of course, cases of them, and then we were selling the Adi Leela to people in the airport, and I was thinking, man, how are they going to understand this? I don't know, but but this is what Prabhupada wants, and we're doing it, and it feels good. It feels good. Do it. As long as it's within that other wing over here, that's the philosophy. If you're doing it according to the philosophy and it feels good, then keep doing it. Right? So, so in this way, Chaitanya Charitamrita puts its emphasis on the and Krishnadas Kaviraj does to the Panchatattva that who he depicts as spreading the Sankirtan. That's how he concludes this Mangalacharan. You can read about it in the last chapter of Sacred Preface. And here we are, seated before them, right? Panchatattva ki jai. And that's our class from Chaitanya Charitamrita tonight. We didn't get too far, but I'm full of stories like this. I saw so much history. It's good sometimes to. Usually I spontaneously do this at Audarya with Gurnish and Rendanya. They tell me that you got to record this. You got to do this to all of the books. You got to write a book. Gurnish said, "I'm going to write a book. It's going to be your history, Guru Maharaj, and I'm going to tell all these stories in there." And so it is. You can learn something from them. I learned something from them, from repeating them, and sharing them with all of you. It's part of the wealth of the benediction of our paribar and in this case of Prabhupada in particular. It's very interesting to think that the very core philosophical foundation of the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's tradition, Achintya Veda Veda, in accordance with that Prabhupada formed these two wings, and that's how it was the basis of his whole mission. Uh, he wanted the temples independent, not overmanaged. Hmm? He didn't want the temples so overmanaged that if a sadhu came to town, the temple president with the pujari had to call up the GBC and ask permission whether a sadhu can come and have darshan. Hmm? No, it wasn't like that. Hmm? They were supposed to be independently thoughtful. This is what Prabhupada wanted. Hmm? They could make that decision on their own, or they could override the wrong decision. Hmm? And get back with a scriptural reply. Anyway, Panchatattva ki jai. So, any question? Yes. Was Prabhupada ever heavy with me? Uh-huh. I'll ask you a question. You'll find the answer in there. On a scale of 1 to 10, how heavy am I? That's about how heavy Prabhupada was with me. I can remember only one time Prabhupada ever chastised me. Before I met Prabhupada, I had a dream about Prabhupada. I was walking with Prabhupada in the park when he had his cane. I'd never met him. And I got so close because I wanted to hear what he was saying, and I couldn't, and then it wasn't attuned to his accent, that I stepped on his heel. You know, if you can get too close, you stepped on somebody's heel. And Prabhupada turned around with his cane, put it on my chest and said, "Don't get too close." That happened in a dream. And then it happened in the waking state also. Right? I was walking with Prabhupada and turned around. Then I remembered the dream. But, and then I faded to the back of the crowd. All right. But next morning I was up close again. I tried to stay as close as I could possibly stay. Whenever Prabhupada would give class in Los Angeles, which Prabhupada was very, in those days, in the early days, when I joined, Prabhupada was spending 3 months in the spring and 3 months in the winter, December, January, like that, February, in Los Angeles, where I was staying. I had gone with that preaching party from the Santa Cruz Mountains. When Prabhupada came to America, they took me there, and Prabhupada initiated me. And he said, "Oh, your wife cannot travel. She's too pregnant. You have to stay here." So I became a permanent member at that time of the New Dwarka community. And Prabhupada that was his headquarters in the United States. And so he spent a fair amount of time there. And so I would probably give class, and I was there. I had a place right next to his asan, the asasan. I would always stand through the class because we didn't sleep much in those days, and it was easy to fall asleep if you were sitting down you weren't in motion, right? So I would always stand up so I would hear the classes perfectly. And then, but before the class, of course, Prabhupada would go on a walk in the morning. Beginning, I wasn't invited on the walks, but Prabhupada would come out of a particular door and then go into his car, and I would be there to open the door, and then I would be there to open the car door, and then when he came back, I would be there to open the door or to see him come out and watch him go in the other door, and then he'd run around where he would come into the temple room to greet the deities and see him at that door. Yeah, that was the routine. And then, he would give the class, and then he would go into his quarters. So I tried to stay as close as I could. One time it was too close, and then that's the only time he ever was heavy with me. Otherwise, Prabhupada was always, other people were heavy with me. I was pretty simple. I have no education, no secular education, higher education. I never had a profession or anything. I just, when I joined Prabhupada, then my life became meaningful. And what he spoke about, what he wrote about, just was so compelling to me that I felt naturally that this should be shared with other people. So I did. I didn't know that that was, a big thing. Book distribution. In the beginning there was a warehouse full of books in Los Angeles. Nobody knew what to do with them. I used to just go out on Hollywood Boulevard where all the stars are. They put the star. I would sell books. I never met any stars out there, but everybody got a book, became a star. That's what I thought. So, so yeah, but there was. It was very sincere what I was doing, selling the books, and it became a thing. I mean, my godbrother Ramaswara kind of like promoted it and marketed it, and got other people involved and so forth. He always used to ask me, okay, let's have a class, and you tell them how you distribute the books. What do you say? What do you? And I would always say, you have to get up in the morning very early to sell a book. You have to chant all of your rounds. You have to go to Mangal Arati. You have to pay attention to the class, and this is how you can sell the books, because that's how I sold the books. I used to go very seriously attend the morning program in Los Angeles, and in the beginning, and then after breakfast, if I hadn't completed my rounds, then I would go and stand before the deities and chant all the rest of my rounds or more until I got inspiration. Then I'll go pack up and go out to Hollywood Boulevard on the bus. I would sell books on the bus to a captive audience. Then when I get off the bus, I had a pair of cartels, and I would chant for 20 minutes, and then I would distribute books for an hour. Then I would chant for 20 minutes by myself, and then I would distribute books. Same bus driver, black man, every day, same bus driver every day. And he took a liking to me. He kind of chuckled at me, So then he started, when I get on the bus and we come to Hollywood, he'd make an announcement. Now you listen to this boy on the bus here. He got something to say. I don't know what it is, but it's important. And I would sell books on the bus. But some devotees were against the book distribution because it also agitated people. And we didn't know what to do. We tried to sell them however we could, and some people felt it was we were a little pushy, and we were. And but we were sincere, and but some devotees complained, and they complained to Prabhupada. So they were heavy with me. But Prabhupada always defended me. Prabhupada would say that if you can do, he is doing, you are criticizing. If you can do better, then I'm sure he will follow. So don't just criticize. You do better. You show the way. Don't just criticize. You show the better way. Then he is sincere. He will follow. So he was very generous with me, very, very, very kind to me. One time, I should have been chastised, but when the Krishna Balaram temple opened, this was a huge chapter also at ISKCON, what that meant to Prabhupada. I had some inkling as to what that meant to Prabhupada. After being a hometown boy in Vrindavan, living in a Radha Damodar temple, and all the struggles that he went through, and coming to the Americas, and then coming back. As I said, I think the other night, the opening of the Krishna Balaram temple was included like the acceptance in Vrindavan of all of us, of the Brahmins and the Goswamis, and so forth. The temple was being, and the deity was being worshipped, and they were accepting it. That these Western people, they were actually Vaishnavas, and Prabhupada had performed a miracle. So there was like a 3-day yajna, right? For the Brahmins were coming and saying different mantras and doing drawing things on this and with colors and so forth. And every now and then there'd be something for the acharya to do. So Prabhupada would come out and put a tulsi leaf and go back into his room. And this went on for 3 days, and then the temple opened, and then every night, of course, there was a big artik. And this artik was like totally choreographed. So you had 3 altars, and the central altar, Krishna Balaram, there was the head pujari. So he would stand there, and the Gaurnatized pujari over here, and Radhasham Sundar's pujari over here, and this pujari would look, go nod like this, nod like this, and then 3 would go forward, bend down, light the incense, and do the Achman. Then look, stand up, step back, look, like this. The whole thing, right? It was choreographed. That's how we were supposed to do it. That's what they told us. So I was there, and and we had for the whole year, my small party of book distributors, all the money that we collected went to build the Krishna Balaram temple. That's why if you go to the Krishna Balaram temple, you'll see it's engraved in the marble. Something like BBTTSKP. That was the name of our party. Bhaktivedanta Book Trust Traveling Sankirtan Party. And Prabhupada had it engraved in the wall, donated by, and also 2 godbrothers of mine, 2 sannyasis, Guru Kripa Swami and Yashodananda Swami, because they were in Japan raising money, and I sent them to Japan. I was key to their going to Japan. That's a whole other story, whole other chapter. They were real characters, these guys. Anyway, they raised a bunch of money there too. This is built the Krishna Balaram temple. So and we were my group of devotees, we were meditating on the Krishna Balaram temple. This is what Prabhupada wanted. This is what we were doing. We're selling the books. The money's going to build the temple, and what it meant to Prabhupada. So from that service, I got some inner insight what this meant to Prabhupada, the Krishna Balaram temple. So for the opening, this is a huge thing. It was supposed to open for Janmashtami in 1974, and that's the middle of the year. It wasn't a time of the festival when devotees from all over the world would come to Vrindavan and Mayapur. And Prabhupada had told me, every year you should go and preach all year long and then come and spend 1 month with me in Vrindavan and Mayapur. So no one could stop me from doing that. Prabhupada told me to do it. Not that I really had any authority. I was kind of independent, but I was respectful, but I just didn't need to be managed. So but my godbrother Ramaswamy said, you can't go, in the middle of the year because you've got to sell books. I told him, I'm not going to miss the opening of the Krishna Balaram temple. What kind of samskars I will get from that? I'm not here just for selling books. There's a purpose behind selling these books, to develop love for Krishna. And this is a very special opportunity, what this means to Prabhupada. But anyway, so I was going to go. And we're going to take some devotees also. But it wasn't ready in time. So it turned out it was at the time of the festival, in the springtime of 1975, just prior to Ram Navami, just prior to Prabhupada giving me sannyas also. So anyway, my group of brahmacharis, I wanted to give them the opportunity to offer artik to Krishna Balaram, or Krishna Balaram, Radha Shyam, and Gauranatai, because I felt this would be very helpful to them. This is such a big thing, and we used to travel always, so we had no home temple. We had no home. We were homeless. So if you didn't reside in a particular temple, then your opportunity to do Seva Puja was limited at best, because they had their own pujaris and you were visiting. We would visit, traveling to inspire book distribution. So I was always looking to give them opportunity to do deity worship and take advantage of that opportunity myself. That's a whole other story. It's an interesting story, but I won't go into that. But in this instance, I wanted them to have the opportunity. So my godbrother Vaisheshika, we may know him, he's famous now. He joined my party when he was 17. Oh, such a nice fellow. And another devotee named Surdas, who's passed away, was famous for his very gruff nature on the outside and his very soft heart for Prabhupada and Krishna on the inside. And he would sing like that too, with a gruff voice, like a somebody on the street, playing real good for free. that kind of person. That's a famous song. So he passed away, but we went. I went and I said, we would like to offer arti tonight. And each night for a week, the festival was going on, and Prabhupada was coming to the arti, Sandhya arti, the evening arti, with some dignitary, some member of Congress or whatever, politicians usually or some, and he was showing them the temple and then taking them to the arti, going to each altar, and then returning back to his quarters. So I pushed. They said, "You can't, and I said, "No, we're going to offer the artik." And they just, it was me, and they knew I had like in with Prabhupada, so they didn't push back. So we got up there, and I'm at the Krishna Balaram altar, going and giving the nods and everything like that. Well, Vaisheshika blew it. He was so nervous, nervous, and Prabhupada was going to be coming out, So the whole thing went just like, totally haywire. The whole thing was totally out of sync and whatnot. I mean, we offered the Artik with our hearts and everything, but it was like, so after the Artik, then it was time for Prabhupada to chastise me, really. So he went back to his room and he said, "Who was offering that Artik?" And so then his voice said, "That was Tripurari Maharaj." I took sannyas a few days later. So he said, "There's Tripurari and his party." And I said, "Oh, then it's all right." So he should have chastised me, but he was I was worthy of lots of chastisement, for sure, but probably was very, very generous with me. So I try to be generous with you. But that 2% out of the 10, you should take that seriously. I have that side too. And there may come a time when I have to use that, and you may think, "I never seen that. Doesn't sound like it. Maybe that's coming from somebody else." No, it's coming from me. That's part of me also. Don't think otherwise. Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Gaudiya Vaishnava Guru Parampara ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Jai